Beautiful weather. I want to make the most of it because we're not getting great weather. I love the fact that here's the beautiful Roddy Doyle. He hears a radio report. Immediately he's inspired in the morning to go up and start writing on this. Hands in a first draft to Element. That's when you get involved. 4-week prep, 4-week shoot. Within 6 months, it's at Toronto. That's kind of sort of a sign of this is all good. This all works. This is not a struggle to figure out how do we tell this story. Did it feel at all like a hard? Because it is an important story. Was it hard for you to get into?
To get into it? No, well, I mean, it didn't. From that draft, the first draft that Roddy brought in, there was a work done on it. It wasn't, it didn't.
Sure.
It didn't it didn't go from that draft to 4 weeks prep and
of course, yeah.
Thing. So, but it was essentially formed in that draft, and there was no heavy lifting on the draft. It was there was a sort of, that's what you get when you work with a writer like Roddy, but there was let's say, we pushed it in certain areas and shaped it a bit more. So it was kind of like sort of screwdriver work in terms of enhancing it, pushing it, peaking sort of emotional moments a little bit more, feeling there was something more in an episode in the film or a part of the film that we could go further into that. So it was sort of that, and he'd write a supplementary scene or expand a scene or something like that. So that is what happened. And doing that is part of, I suppose that's the great thing about that, is it lets you enter the film in a certain way, you know what I mean? That you feel that you, number one, you get to know it in a lot more detail, but also that you begin to you bring an influence into it at that stage. That's consistent where you feel it should go,
Yeah. I was thinking too that you've said before you're not really a political filmmaker. You're not a campaigner, as you said, and you don't want to be up on a podium at any point. But at the same time, of course, you want to tell stories that have meaning and have an impact and have a sense of purpose. Yeah.
Well, I mean, everyone is political, so I wouldn't feel I'm not a political filmmaker. I'm just not a polemicist,
right?
In the sense, where I'm not going to make a film that has a very, let's say, precise and specific political message to it. My feeling would be, and it goes back a long way, and it goes back to when I was a student. There's a particular philosopher that I was very interested in called Herbert Marcuse, and his view was that any revolutionary potential within art is in its beauty, is held in, the substance of its beauty, let's say.
Right.
And that's how it stays with people, or it's how you plant a seed, or it affects people. Now, where that goes to obviously is a different matter, but that there's an impetus there. And that's what I would feel in a way as a storyteller, that if you lose that sense of ambiguity or something, the ability to become sublime and beautiful, its power is diminished. Now, I think maybe that's in a longer term. I still obviously think this, someone like Ken Loach, who's more of a polemicist, obviously makes brilliant films and they stay. And but the ones I think that he makes that have the longest life are the ones that have that sense of beauty. So like Kez, I feel, has both.
Sure.
That sort of, he's managed to get that beautiful blend between, a beautiful film and a lyrical film, with, a great critique of the class system in Britain,
Yeah. So that's a Trojan horse effect, where you're kind of taken up with a beautiful story and the character and all that, and it's only really the politics are inside the horse that you don't realise it's come into your life, into your, as you watch this film, it's inside the story as opposed to this is the story.
It's inside. Well, I suppose it's in its humanity, and what it's doing is it's trying to,
beautiful. Thank you, man.
It's trying to distill something. I suppose to find the elements of the core values, those indestructible values that we all share, and to build up from that And that's the beauty, it lets you access that, I think, you know.
Well, the film debuted in Toronto Film Festival, and then a month later it was out in cinemas. Do you find yourself, you know, I don't know if it's always, you've been making films since 1994 and you've gone through this many times, but is it a difficult time that you're sort of very, very, very sensitive to how it's received? Do you feel that, oh no, the film was what we wanted and we made it the way we wanted, I'm delighted, you know, everything else is sort of out of your hands? Or?
Yeah, there's a bit of a dichotomy there, really, because on the one hand, part of you wants the film to have as good a life as you can have, and, you know, by good a life I mean that it gets to be seen.
Yeah.
Because it's not like it's not a film in itself isn't cinema. Cinema is the relationship between the audience and the film.
Right.
You know, it's that moment when they come to see it and the energy that's created and how they discuss it afterwards and where it goes beyond the four walls of the building of the cinema. So you want it to have as broad a life, you know, so that gets you involved in, you know, how it's perceived, the publicity attached to it, who it sells to, where it sells, what kind of thing. But on the other hand, the other side of that equation is, you know, maybe in order to do that, you have to focus on the thing itself and to make the thing work in the way that you feel it will work for an audience, and not get too consumed in where it might go or what might happen to it. So there's a sort of balance between those two things, and they're always fighting a bit, and you have to find a space between the two to make that work, you know.
And I don't know for you, and I don't know if you've spoken to Roddy, just how the film was received. I mean, it got very good reviews. It's generally regarded as a very good film, but I don't know whether you guys sort of, you took note of, did it have any kind of political impact? Was there, I don't know if there were certain reactions that you were kind of happy to see happening, or I don't know how it sort of, you felt it went down, or how it.
I mean, the reviews were fantastic, you know, and it got great, and it's still like very early in its life, because it's, you know, while it's been seen in Toronto and London, you know, the rest of its life is only starting, you know, in terms of it'll get a US release, I think, it's going to get a French release, other Scandinavian territories and all that, so it's going to have, you know, a life throughout most of next year. So, and in a way, that's, you know, say the other side of its life, in a sense, you know, we've seen its domestic life, but we haven't seen its international life fully, you know. And in here, it obviously, you know, it connected with, you know, the coverage of the debate and the issue of homelessness, and it sort of appeared at the peak of that, and was part of peaking that conversation and discussion at that time. And so I suppose it made the atmosphere in which it came out in very distinctly charged, you know, it had a certain energy and frisson about it, which meant it was talked about a lot. I think sometimes it was talked about more in terms of the issue rather than as a film sometimes. And which is great, because that's one of its purposes, to get people engaged in that. But then on the other hand, I think, you know, obviously as a filmmaker you want it to be seen in its own right as well, you know? Yeah. So look, it had a fantastic reception. You know, the reviews are across the board great, and the reaction to it in audiences when I saw it was very strong and powerful, and it stayed with people. I think that's one of the things that they said, the film stayed with me for 2 or 3 days. You know, they couldn't quite, some people said I couldn't wash it off. I couldn't shake it off. But one of the things that slightly, because when it came out and the sort of commentaries, you know, sometimes people say you should see this film, or this film should be mandatory viewing, and there's a few comments which is like, I hate to hear that, even much as I think people think it's that important and all that. You know, the film isn't like eating your greens, you know, and any film isn't like going to mass or eating your greens.
Sure.
You know, it has to principally work in its own right, regardless of what it's saying about society or anything else. It has to work as, do you engage with the experience of watching this as a story and the characters? And I think people, when, you know, I think they do, you know, it's a film that seems to connect with people. And while it's about a subject that often has a thing of grimness about it, I don't think the experience of watching it is that, and that's not what I've heard from people, that there's a sort of sense that it has a challenge in it at times, but at the same time, the kind of love that's there in the family is quite uplifting in ways, and I think people respond to that really immediately.
Well, I often sort of think about the way a film has an incredible, life in that obviously the cinema release is one thing, and true cinema lovers and film lovers and all that go to the cinema, but the bulk of people will see it on a small screen somehow, and never more so than now because the streaming and internet and all that, a huge amount of people watch movies that way, and obviously when it comes around on television, and I don't know whether that is certainly the case of this film. That'll be another major sort of part of its journey, because there will be a huge amount of people will want to watch it when it comes around on RTE or whatever it might be, or they watch it online. Does that has the modern kind of way that people live by as much box sets as blockbusters? There's a real love for TV and big television and all that. Does that, I don't know, that affects you as a filmmaker? Whether you sort of see it's exciting that there are people like Amazon and Netflix involved now.
It's an incredible situation at the moment, because the amount of money that's going into all of those platforms is huge, and obviously that draws talent as well. And there's acting talent, writing talent, directing talent, and it creates opportunities to go there. But there's a couple of people I know, good writers. I was talking to them recently about it, and they were saying, both of them were saying to me, that they like closed narrative, and I think so do I, and the cinema, while to work in television they've done it, is great, and it has brilliant things about it. There's something about the closed narrative that it's a moment, and there's a button put on it. It isn't unending. The unending things, I think, have a slight deterministic feel about them. You always feel that they're trapped in the idea of what the series is, and it will always be trapped in that. It's very hard to escape it, obviously there's some brilliant. Sorry, let me just turn it. There's some brilliant.
That's Netflix to let you know that you're wrong there.
Yeah, exactly. I'll be honest. This is I'll just be putting some algorithm and put on the shelf, I suppose I don't mean to be critical of the television thing, because I watch it and there's so many great things, but there's still that space, and maybe that space of the cinema will migrate into that. Maybe this pendulum will swing, and those platforms will say, actually, we want more closed narrative pieces.
Sure.
We want more things that have that. Whether that be that they commit to just one series or something, and it's that, and that's the experience, and you just have that or not. I suppose there's an element of it's the trap. It's once they have your eyeballs, they want to keep your eyeballs.
Sure.
So it's about that, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
As much as anything like that. Once they have you, they say, okay, we want to keep your eyeballs here. It's not about the work itself anymore. It's about keeping your eyeballs. It's not about getting your eyeballs in the first place.
Yeah.
There's something that just allowed to do in cinema, and a sort of kind of sense of intimacy and urgency. But as you say, I remember doing TV documentaries years ago, and you get into a taxi, and the taxi driver says, you say, well, what do you do, and now I say I work in computers, but then I used to say, okay, making films or documentaries, and they'd say, oh, did you see that one last night? And it was your one,
Sure.
And that you saw that immediate, pervasiveness of that medium, how it becomes national or international in a really true sense. Everybody's seen it as a talking point and all that. So Rosie will have that life at some stage. I don't know, but it'll be on, it'll be on RTE at some stage. So I'm not too sure when that is.
Right.
But it'll have that exposure, But I still love the. There's something that happens at that moment of the end of a film where the audience has to put a full stop to it, and the big crowd leaving the cinema is part of that.
I suppose the one thing I will say about the and there are many beautiful series out there on television, but you just know when you start a series, somebody's looking for their hat, and there's like 10 episodes or 20 episodes. They're not going to find their hat for 20 hours. That can be. It affects how you watch a story, because you kind of know how much time we've got to
Look,
fill here.
it's brilliant, but it's different.
Yeah.
You know,
Yes.
and I suppose that's what I'm saying. You know, just because it shares so many of the same things, doesn't mean it gives all the same kicks or give all the same things. And I like making, particularly independent cinema has particular atmosphere around it. It's not just in the product or what the thing that you make. It's also in the way that you make it and the atmosphere, the set, the way you move towards making that film, the sort of commitment that's involved in it, brings about something that's interesting to me.
I should say now, we'll wrap up with the fact that I've sort of known you for a long time, and you're talking about 25 years of being up there on the screen and Ailsa in '94, but the real breakthrough I think was 1997. I Went Down, a perfect film, and then Blow Dry was an experience that was that Hollywood thing of trying to reach that bigger audience, and then Man About Dog was a hit, and then you went into horror with Shrooms and Freak Dog, and I just think, and then your documentary about your father's father was out there, but that was 2012. But I think the last two films in particular just seems to be so rich and so kind of beautiful. I don't know whether it would be fair to say with Viva and with Rosie, I don't know if you feel, well, oh no, I'm evolving as a filmmaker. I'm at a good place now. I know what I'm doing, or whether it's just random that it's just whatever the project comes through the system. And
I think it's to do, I mean, I feel in a way, maybe those films have sort of brought me back to come somewhere where I started earlier on, and then, for various reasons you take different paths.
Yeah.
Some of them, I was involved in a production company, and you tend to make decisions sometimes for the production company decisions.
The bottom line kind of thing of how will this make money.
We need to make a film next year. Yeah. What's available? What can we do? Sometimes it's that. Also, I think there was an aspect. The industry has matured here in the last number of years, whereas there was a period where it was more fragile. And there was a kind of sense, there was a long period where, say, the press about the film board and the Irish film industry wasn't as good as it is at the moment. Yeah. And there was a feeling of saying maybe the films weren't performing well enough commercially. And that, because, let's say, there was a fragility about the funding model here, right, in the sense that it could be at a stroke of a pen changed. And I felt a little bit of an impetus at times, maybe wrongly, but to sort of say, okay, now maybe you should make some films that can justify themselves, right, because they connect more immediately, let's say. Yeah. But I think the film industry's gone through a lot and has matured, and it's a better platform to come out of. So both, maybe I'm just paralleling what's happened in a broader sense with my own development. Yeah. And I've come to a type of film that I'm very comfortable making, and I want to make.
So you're a good filmmaker now, right?
I'm a very good filmmaker.
Rock and roll.